Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is one of my favorite movies of all time. It represents everything I love about storytelling. The overall aesthetic of the film is striking and bold, which is one of the most important things for me when it comes to film. There's a lot of unique aesthetic choices in the movie that are made in respect to the graphic novel series that this movie adapts. The way the film is paced and presented is reminiscent of the way the comic is paced, with each scene and line of dialogue flowing as if you were reading a comic from panel to panel. The opening scene of the movie where Scott tells his fellow band members that he's dating a high school girl named Knives Chow really shows this off. The dynamics between each character here are just the most entertaining thing on a moment-to-moment level. No time is wasted here. The pacing is perfect, every line of dialogue is quick and impactful, but yet none of the dialogue here feels like natural conversation at all. And that's what's so strong about it. It really feels like you're watching a comic book in live action. And that idea is further realized in the way that the film presents its fight scenes and visual effects. They're all so creative, so over the top, and so interesting. The fight between Scott Pilgrim and Todd Ingram is one of my favorites in the film. Todd Ingram has vegan superpowers that allow him to telekinetically launch Scott Pilgrim around at will, and his hair looks pretty much exactly like a Super Saiyan from Dragon Ball Z, and it's awesome. He launches Scott through a ton of brick walls and into the air. The brick walls that Scott gets launched through serves as a great set piece. It's just so visually crazy and cool to see him just go through layers of walls and all the bricks are flying everywhere. It's amazing. And seeing him get launched in the air is it's just so cool and over the top. And the juxtaposition between how dramatic this encounter is for Scott in the moment of the fight and how not a big deal this is for all of his friends watching him fight makes the scene so much funnier. Some of them even leave to get pizza in the middle of the fight. They just don't care that much. And that juxtaposition is what the film does best. At times, it feels like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a down-to-earth film about a lazy 23-year-old and his friends. And then, at other times, it feels like a crazy over-the-top story with a ton of action and unique visuals. The director of the film, Edgar Wright, has stated in interviews that this is sort of like the film that's going on in Scott Pilgrim's head. Like you're watching his ideal fantasy of what his life would be like in his world. And I think that's interesting because in many ways, I think this film represents a sort of ultimate celebration of pop culture influence and over-the-top action. It's sort of the film that plays out in every nerdy person's head in a way, but it also has a genuine heart and soul behind it, and those two elements combined are what make it so appealing. The over-the-top escapism of the filmmaking and presentation, paired with the relatable and laid-back character relationships, is sort of the core appeal of pretty much every Scott Pilgrim piece of media, and it applies to this film as well. That's one of the things that really drew me to the comic series when I first read it, was just how relatable and interesting all the characters in it were, but also how just fun and exciting the story is just to read. One of the main concerns I had when going into this film after reading the graphic novels is how this story would even work in live action, because the story itself is so over the top and just takes full advantage of the comic medium that it's presented in. For example, there are parts in the story that break the fourth wall. There's one part where Stephen Stills teaches you how to make vegan shepherd's pie, for example, or another part where Sex Bomb is playing a song and a narrator pops up and displays the very simple guitar chords to the song, which further explains how terrible Sex Bomb is as a band. And there's another part where Scott comments on Ramona's hair color and text pops up reminding the audience that this is a black and white book. All of these things use the medium of comics in a fun and interesting way, and they are just some examples of why the graphic novels are so interesting. But now, after rewatching the film, I think it fully takes advantage of its own medium as much as the comic does. And it does this by just going all in. Another interesting thing Edgar Wright said in an interview about this film is that adapting the Scott Pilgrim comic gave him a license to just let his imagination run wild when making the thing. And you really feel that when you watch it. Every visual component to this film is just so well made and so well realized. The iconography of Sex Bomb and the animations that play when they're playing their songs, the crazy over-the-top action and fight scenes, the way that Scott pulls the power of love and the power of understanding out of his chest when fighting Gideon Graves, the way Knives Chow interrupts the fight between Scott and Gideon at the end, the way Ramona joins in on the fight at the end, the final battle in general, the set design, the set pieces, everything just looks so amazing. And watching this film just makes me wish that more high-budget live-action movies would take these kind of risks. Because so many blockbuster films just feel overproduced with no soul. Like they threw a bunch of money into making something that just looks like your standard idea of what a Hollywood movie should look like. And Scott Pilgrim feels like the opposite of that. I love Scott Pilgrim so much. I love Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the movie. I love the graphic novels. Ramona Flowers is my favorite character. She was the first ever digital art piece I ever did. I did a fan art of Ramona Flowers with a mouse in Photoshop. It's just passion. Like, this series is so good. This movie does a great job adapting the comic. It's amazing. Every character is good. This series has good action, good comedy, good writing. It has good LGBT representation with Wallace. It just has everything. It's good. It's just good. I just want to gush about Scott Pilgrim. It's good. It's just like so good. Like, it's just so good.